1. Go ahead.
Great. So thank you, Eileen. So today we're here to talk about open data standards and talk about mobility data. We have two guests with us, well, two companies with us. Open Mobility Foundation, we have Michael. At Boaz Bike, we have Emil and Tim Holmgren. Emil is the CEO of Boaz Bikes. Tim is the CTO. And Michael works at Open Mobility Foundation, which is a foundation that is basically governing a standard for data called Mobility Data Specification for all e-scooters and even, I believe, e-bikes for governments. So we're going to dive in a little bit of what's happening in the industry and space. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So we're going to kick it off with kind of like the standard. So Michael, we're going to give the floor to you to kind of share a little bit of slides on what Open Mobility Foundation is working on.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Greg, and thanks to DataGovs for hosting. I'm going to share my slides from Google Drive here on this platform. We'll see how this goes. There it is. All right. You all can see that?
Yes.
All right, great. So I'm going to talk about the Open Mobility Foundation a little bit. Excuse me, and then also about how we do open standards. And I'm going to mention open data. I have some slides on this, but I'm going to focus more on the standards and go quickly through the open data, more as a differentiator between the two. So first about the Open Mobility Foundation and about myself. I'm Michael Schnerla. I'm the Director of Open Source Operations for the OMF. I've been in the role about 2.5 years. Before this, I worked for the city of Louisville, doing data for the city, kind of citywide things. At the OMF, I'm basically what I do is I steward the data specs that we have, and I take contributions from members and the public who want to add features or changes to it, and then roll those things up into a release. So to make that happen, the Open Mobility Foundation was created, and it has a governance structure and a purpose to help steward the data standards. So in the sort of end of this century, we had a lot of, and before, we had a lot of physical infrastructure and rules around that, and everything is defined in this sort of physical space in the real world. As many of you all are familiar with, you can see these sorts of things that are still common today. But in the last 10 years or so, the need for digital infrastructure and different ways to manage the physical world digitally have come about. And you can see some of these here: apps, delivery robots, delivery devices, curb usage, maps, geolocation, geofencing, things like that. And that's where the OMF comes in. We really want to be the manage the digital infrastructure for the public good and public right of way and in public spaces. So we build data standards and open source tools. We work with the public sector and the private sector in collaboration to encourage the growth of new services and manage what's already out there. We're big on cross-sector relationships, and we want to find people that have this sort of shared vision of mobility in the current day and for cities. And we're heading towards something that has been talked about, and we're part of it, I guess, the city transportation operating system of tomorrow. And that can mean a lot of things, and I'll tell you about our piece of it. So we have a lot of members. We actually have over 50 members so far. You can see some of them here: the private sector public sector at the top, and private sector and foundations at the bottom. You can go to our website for a full list, but it's free for any public sector entity to join and participate. And then the private sector pays a fee based on the amount of employees they have. And that just by joining, you get to take leadership roles in the development of the standards, even though the development is totally done in the open and you don't have to be a member at all to participate in the development. So our first data spec that we created, which came out of Los Angeles Department of Transportation, is called the Mobility Data Specification. And it's a way to connect an API to connect mobility companies with local governments. It's used in over 160 cities around the world, over 21 countries. And it's generated a marketplace of tools for cities to manage the public right-of-way, and vendors have come out of this to help both sides, the mobility companies and local governments, and do this data sharing and digital policy. It started with e-scooters, mopeds, and bikes, but we're really into the space now with it for taxis, TNCs, delivery robots, and car share as well. And some other future things like urban air mobility is on our radar too. So this is a picture of all that. MDS is sort of the digital plumbing that connects the government to companies to help manage the streets and sidewalks and other rights of way for all different types of shared mobility devices and vehicles. I'm going to give you a quick overview of this spec, and you can dig into more of this on GitHub. But it's a two-way data standard. It's a way for cities to publish their policies, metrics, geography, and jurisdictions digitally, and in a public way that anyone can see. And then from operators, there's data about their operations of the vehicles themselves, where they are, what problems they might be having, what the state they're in, and things like that. And that's private. That just goes to cities. You could think of it, the data flow of this information through a privacy lens. So on the left, you've got the actual company vehicles and apps that have a lot of information about, as needed to run the operations, about the rider, about the vehicle, trip data, and financial data. But all that goes to the company, and then MDS is a piece of that the city gets. That's a subset of the vehicle and trip data. And then there's a way to make some of that public through our metrics, reports, and aggregate data that we that some cities have chosen to publish, and we have a way to do some of that as well. So you can see some of the data here on the left is in our MDS provider endpoint, which is information, some of the information that comes from the operators to cities. We get a lot of vehicle information. You can see on the right a bunch of stuff that's not in MDS. And that's taken from our OMF Privacy Committee's work that they've done to classify this, and part of a larger guide around using MDS in cities and then under GDPR in Europe. And I'll mention open data here. So, you know, MDS is an open standard, and that's very different than open data. You could even call it an open data standard, and it gets a little confusing there, but for open data, there is a way to publish a subset of the private MDS data around operations by aggregating it into buckets and both time and space buckets to publish online so that other people can use it. You can see our state of practice on our website, which lists where these things are published so far. And it's very valuable for researchers and other people in the transportation space. You can see an example here. I'm just going to go through these quickly, but there's Austin, Calgary, and Chicago sort of put it into these buckets when they publish it about trips and origin, destination information. Louisville and Kansas City bucketed a different way by truncating the latitude and longitude. It's good for some use cases, not for others when you get to this aggregation level. Minneapolis snaps it to the different streets, and some other people do as well. And then there's even sort of street segments, which is maybe a newer method that some cities are using, like Calgary and a company called Ride Report to publish the data. So we have a privacy guide for this open data publishing and a way to for cities to follow this, just like they do with any sorts of other information that the cities collect on a day-to-day basis. And there's a method they have, and then this helps them with that analysis and what to publish. We're working at a way to sort of formalize this more in MDS as well. And there's a GitHub issue on this, which you can link. You can click later when you get these slides. And I'm going to mention our second data spec here. So MDS is really managing vehicles in the right of way. We have a second spec called the curb data specification. And this is about defining access to curb zones and curb spaces, and then monitoring activity there to improve those policies. So it helps. Right now, it's in the pilot phase. We have a version 1.0 out, and it's really meant to scale dynamic curb zones and commercial loading areas. We worked with about 170 people from 70 organizations to develop it over the course of a year. And we've got 24 organizations currently actively using it. This is a little picture of how it works, that the government sends out in green there a list of all the locations in the curb and what the rules are and when it's available, and even what the availability of the spaces are. And then events come back as people use the curb, taxis, TNCs, delivery, et cetera, and then that gets rolled up into metrics, which come back to the city to improve those curb spaces. And the way that you can tell what's happening at the curb, really any sensor can be used for this, and we have a way to standardize all types of sensors, so that if you have multiple sensors or one sensor in one city and a different one in another city, it comes back in the same format. And yeah, that's maybe a more detailed iteration of what I just talked about. And then we do have these metrics, which I mentioned, which are well-defined ways to publish publicly as open data what's happening, what has happened at the curb, and things like turnover in sessions and dwell time, et cetera. So I'll leave it at that. There's our website and Twitter account and our GitHub account, and happy to talk more about this, and excited to hear from our next presenters.
Great.
Yeah, thank you,
Michael. Go ahead, Greg. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thanks, Mike, for breaking down a little bit about what OMF is working on. So Open Mobility Foundation is kind of a force in gathering governments together to come up with a standard and then basically work with private sector companies. So some of the questions we had, and I know Eileen has it listed up here, is, I guess for you, what do you believe the big role for OMF is in the future, as we see more kind of micromobility companies coming up? There's companies like Boaz Bikes that's crushing it and growing, but there's also established players. So where do you see like the role of OMF fitting for more organizations popping up, not just in public sector, but private?
Yeah, I think one of our biggest strengths is just the role of convener and bringing all these entities together to discuss what's possible with data sharing and digital regulation and rule setting, and what's not possible, and to convene those entities and collectively determine what would be of most value for the public. And so, you know, I think we're squarely going to stay in the realm of shared devices. So it's going to be things like, you know, taxis and scooters, or anything else that's just either operated by a human or operated by a computer, even automated, like automated taxis, automated delivery robots, et cetera, remote piloted things. That's where we're in, and we're definitely focused on the commercial side of that activity. So that's our role. I don't see us getting into private management of anything, but it's going to be commercial management with permits and things like that, doing the things that, helping the cities do the things they've always done, managing things with permits and rules and safety and equity, and trying to digitally do all that so that cities can really do more than they're able to do without these sorts of tools and standards. And it helps a lot of the companies operating as well by having a single data sharing standard when they operate in dozens or hundreds of cities. So that's one of our benefits for the private companies as well. And you know, as you all know, probably, you know, the devices and the ways we're using the public space and the curb are going to continue to change in ways we're not even thinking of now. So we're trying to build flexibility into all aspects of what we do as well.
Great, and I know you have to hop soon. So a follow-up question that I had to that was just, your role is open source director of, so kind of define what that means, because there's a lot of foundations, there's a lot of people that do different things. I think you're the first that I've seen like a role like yours. So can you talk a little bit about like why you believe your role is necessary? Obviously, you're having this API and this open source data standard that people can adopt, but why do you think your role is so important?
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it as a unique role, but it probably is, at least in this space. I mean, having the tool be open source, which means that the development of it is totally public. People can see go to every meeting, go to meeting see meeting recordings and notes and slides and everything like that. They can make their own comments on GitHub and other places whenever they like to suggest changes. Having it be totally open like that is very important for, I think, getting the large enough community without any barriers for people to participate. And open source really allows that. It's different than, say, and it also allows us to be, I think, nimble and change things as they happen. We can make point releases with the community that are quicker, or we can have major releases like we're working on now that add new sorts of modes and things. And that's very different than like an ISO standard that can take years, and some of the work is set in stone, and you may have to pay to be not only a member, but pay to use the standard later. We really want that open source, free, a license that anyone can take the spec and use it and modify it however they want, even, and improve it and give it, contribute it back if they'd like, or contribute tools on top of it. So that's pretty unique in the area. GBFS is another example of this. Mobility Data is an organization that's similar to ours, but they manage specs that are more in the public-facing specs as opposed to policy and enforcement data specifications and data sharing. But I think that's important. I think the other thing, which I didn't exactly mention, is that our board is made up of city employees in the transportation space. And it's the only nonprofit I know of that has a board that's 100% city employees. I mean, I think that's pretty rare. And it shows sort of that cities find this valuable, that they're willing to work with companies on developing this and using these standards. And I think that's really an important point too, and part of our open source, public facing transparency goals that we have.
Great. So thanks for explaining that. So here at DataGovs, we use the MDS format, and we're also working on the curve data specification and applying it to our API to help businesses. So I think what you just mentioned about OMF's role, as well as having 100% board of city employees, is really critical. I want to shift it a bit, because in the market today, especially with micromobility, there's a lot of big giants working and building. They have tons of cities. And one of our users or customers, and sometimes I like to call them partners, Boaz Bikes, has stepped into the arena, and they're taking a unique approach to building assets that are in cities. They're minority led. So Mike, thank you for giving a quick overview of what your work is, but I want to really just step into the second arena to talk to Boaz Bikes and their team about what they're working on and what they see as interesting in the space.
Milo, do you want to start? Do you want me to? Or it's up to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks a ton. Thanks for having us. So, our thinking is, we absolutely love, DataGovs. You guys take a lot of work off our plate. The whole MDS, or what they're doing at OMF, we think it sort of helps, even the playing field out. It helps us out greatly with cities. With cities requesting this data, it puts everybody on that same playing field, where operators aren't just, abusing the city's trust and allowing the cities, to come in and say, hey, you have too many vehicles out, or, you're not, doing what you said you were going to do as far as servicing different zones. So, I mean, we're a big fan of the whole MDS, and glad to be a part of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, MDS makes smaller companies like us that have not limited resources, but kind of growing as we expand and kind of build up our departments. It helps us compete with the bigger companies that are able to roll out to different cities. So by having that open standard, we're able to roll into different cities more seamlessly. So for us, having the kind of the open source code that we're able to review, and then having the data being standardized between different cities, it makes us going into Detroit or an Arizona city more seamless. So.
Great. I want to share my screen really quickly to just show everybody here a little bit about like the product that you guys have built. So this is Boaz Bikes. You immediately go to the page and it's, we're moving people safely. We're serving the underserved. You're the future of micromobility. We are Boaz. Emil or Tim, either one of you, can you break down, how you set your beliefs here of serving the underserved? Because most people would assume, right? Like, okay, there's a bunch of different scooters or bikes in a city. What does serving the underserved mean? Can you talk a little about like that?
Yeah, so we've noticed a couple of things. When we started the company back in 2018, it was mainly for the safety. We saw that whole and we built Boaz because of it. But once we got into the market and into different cities, we saw these transit deserts where, people didn't have, safe and reliable transportation options. And, the underserved is, not only, people who can't afford, to pay this high dollar, but it's also the people that can't get to a bus line easily. So that's who we look after. We go into these high populated areas as well, but a certain high percentage of our fleet is wrapped around those people that need to get to and from that that need to get take care of those short trips that may not be in these populated downtown areas. Yeah, that's how we look after the underserved.
And you talk about being the future of micromobility. So I see Boaz is in a couple of cities now. So can you talk to me a little bit about like how you look at expansion and growth? Because you guys you did some crowdfunding, right? You brought the community together that said, hey, everybody can participate and own a piece of Boaz. And as you own a piece of Boaz, we're gonna put these assets in different cities. So I'm really curious to like your strategy and why community was such a valuable role for you in terms of building Boaz Bikes.
Yeah. So we truly believe, we are a brand for the people. And we've had, tremendous success on the crowdfunding route. We've raised a couple $1 million, and it's been, the backbone. Our crowdfunding investors have been, the door openers to certain markets, to us acquiring certain permits. Our largest market, Detroit, was through one of our early crowdfunding investors. And now we're sitting here with, over 100 plus people on our franchise list. And majority of those people are, from our community, from our family, our crowdfunders, that's going to open up, our next 100 plus cities. So we really hold to that community. We know that this is a very, very competitive space with big players. And VC is a crazy market, but getting the community involved and letting them own a piece of it, so that when we do scale, once we do IPO, everybody will be able to celebrate the victory with us.
Great. And as you build this business, and I tell people all the time, like building a business and then building a technology business, it's two different things. It's not like, especially with what you're working on, right? You have a physical product that's out there, and then you have an app. So to really get this business in good shape, you need the right people on your team. So I really want to like lean into Tim right now, who I know is a chief technology officer at Boaz Bikes, and get your perspective as you guys grow, right? You have funding, you have resources, like Emil just mentioned, 100 people on the franchise list. So how are you looking at like things from a CTO to make sure that you have all the tools necessary to enhance and give the best customer experience to anybody that's using Boaz Bikes in the city?
Oh, we're looking to really enhance the user experience to make it as seamless and easy to use for the customer. So whether it's walking up to the bike, to finding the bikes, to renting the bikes, or even putting funds onto into the account, our whole focus is to make it a great user experience for the customer. So everything we do is kind of for performance optimization and just clean, easy, kind of straightforward kind of technology. So.
Use DataGovs, and I want to really break down the challenge or problem of what you said to yourselves when you're just like, you know what, let's work with a group to handle our API management so we can focus on other things, because that's very unique, right? We bump into a lot of the bigger, giant, kind of like micromobility companies, giant in terms of they have hundreds of millions of dollars of backing behind them. And one thing we know is like they all have different takes on how they're doing data sharing. And one of the things that we particularly like about Boaz Bikes, not just because you're one of our customers, is just like the diversity aspect to it. So I'm really kind of curious of like what got you to this point of like, okay, we need somebody to help us with MDS as we grow and expand to 20, 30, 40 cities in the next couple of years.
Oh, we're looking for someone that has experience with MDS. We leaned on your experience with working with governments on the other side of the provider. So for us, we wanted to focus again on the technology, developing the API, developing the backend solutions, developing the app, and so forth. So for us, it just made more sense to work with a partner as yourself that has the experience, and that would be able to kind of keep up with MDS as it continues to grow and expand. So add new technologies like Curve and so forth. It just seemed like a better utilization of our resources to work with a partner that was able to dedicate their time into the kind of follow through with that for us. And then we will be able to work with you just to provide the data that you can convert that data for MDS, which makes it, again, a lot easier for us to roll out to different cities. We can keep our standardized data, convert it once into your system, and then you can provide that to all different cities via the MDS standard.
Eileen, do you have any questions? I have a slide deck that I want to get into to just kind of share how we're looking at data analytics and AI and how it's being applied to micromobility. But I want to just give you a quick moment if you have any things that you wanted to ask to Will or Tim.
I think the question that I want to ask is perfect after your slides, because it has to do with data analytics and everything. So we can ask that afterwards.
Cool. All right. So let me load up here. All right, let's get into it. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great, perfect. So again, we're here talking about data standards. We're here talking about the importance of what Open Mobility Foundation is doing, as well as emerging, growing companies like Boaz Bikes that are in many cities. And I wanted to share a story of how we're looking at this market, because we do believe mobility is a key piece, not just to how cities are looking at like improving their infrastructure, including access from going from point A to point B to various populations, including low income. We also believe that AI, which is short for artificial intelligence, is playing a big role in shaping how data standards, automation, as well as businesses are running to improve that customer experience that Tim was just mentioning. So as we see more standards being adopted, we're seeing new things pop up. One thing that we're seeing is like standards around kind of like the same way you drive and you know, okay, the light is red, let me stop, or the light is yellow, or this is a stop sign here, I should do a stop. There's now standards emerging, not just in OMF, Open Mobility Foundation, but standards looking at how do we look at signs tied to technology that's collecting data in the public sphere. And early on, Mike just mentioned like how Open Mobility Foundation was really thinking about this shared device aspect. So what do you share, right? Like some people think about sharing as like, hey, I use this service online to get into the home of somebody else, and I pay them some money off this online, or I use a ride sharing service to hail a cab. But with cities and now micromobility, folks are bringing themselves to different experiences on brands owned by private sector companies. So how we look at this is, okay, somebody may use a system tied to mobility, and this service is being provided by Bike Share Co. And let's say it's Boaz Bikes. What's the technology behind it? What are they using? Maybe Boaz Bikes has an ID system, so every time you log in, they know it's you. What's the interaction mode? In some cases, you don't need to touch anything. You just need to bring out your phone, scan it, and the relationship is you're a member of this community. So in the same way, you may have gone on to crowdfunding and you may have like invested in Boaz Bikes. There are different ways people identify with being a member, a part of community and brand. And what we see is helping organizations as they kind of facilitate this relationship using technology to give them that edge. So a little bit of background of DataGovs. My original role is I worked at Microsoft on the Florida team on public-private partnerships, including cloud adoption, data governance, data analytics. We brought together with my co-founder, Goma, who comes from experiences working at companies and building everything from LiDAR sensors to working at Comcast, Vizio, Costco. And, we've had decades of experiences working not only just at big tech companies, but building software companies and selling those software companies with founding teams. And one of the things we saw, especially that I saw at Microsoft, was how data standards are so important. As we worked with public and private companies, including cities, one of the challenges we saw was, yes, you can open source your data. Yes, you can give them data standards, but that doesn't always mean they're going to have the right tools equipped to basically fundamentally use these tools to give the best service. That's why you see private sector companies in some cases pushing back against things like MDS, because they're like, why do cities need all this data? So what we do at DataGovs is we've built what we believe and what we see as reinventing what data governance means, which means just adding policies, procedures to the way organizations are standardizing their data and giving them interfaces so they can get the best insights from that. We break that down into 3 steps: connect, automate, and monitor. And we work with organizations through an API as well as a web and mobile interface to do that. Some of the things that we've seen in this space as we look at data standards is data standards are popping up everywhere. It's not just scooters and bikes. Data standards are popping up if you're driving a commercial vehicle. There's something mandated by the federal law called electronic login devices. And there are many organizations that now have to keep time and track of when people are out on the road driving their trucks. And if they don't, they can get penalized for that. There's standards in cities tied to incidents. Many people know this is Open 3-in-1. Residents go out and they see an issue of a pothole and they report that, and the city has to take that in. And now what we see in importance is reinventing data governance for what we believe to be the edge. This is processing and looking at data at the location of where it's created and monitoring that so organizations can get the best value from that. So mobility data specification, ran by the Open Mobility Foundation, originally started in LA. LA started this kind of like MDS because LA had a huge problem. And after that, what we saw is organizations like LA Dot using kind of like these standards to basically say to companies, you can only operate here if you're using the standard. Now, once they operate there and use that standard, how do you understand which vendor is outperforming the other one in terms of being compliant, being safe, less injury, less accidents? You have companies like Boaz Bikes that have things like seats, helmets that make sure that riders, as they go about their day, they're protected. So how do you determine who's being the best vendor in serving your city? We're looking at data like that. So here today, DataGovs. So we serve many different companies, small, mid-size, enterprise. We also serve cities like City of Miami and City of Austin and some other cities. And one of the things we commonly see across all these different organizations is how important standardization of data is, as well as how important it is to make sure that data is structured in the right place so they can get insights. How does this pan out into outcomes? For us, we've seen this in cities that want to track if there's a scooter incident. Using MDS, we've seen a lot of organizations say, hey, we want to track when a scooter is fall down. We want to track when a scooter is in a properly parked place, but we don't want to look at 10,000 emails every month. Instead, we want to be able to say, hey, these are 100 issues that are really important. The rest of them aren't as important. Let's make sure that we have somebody in public works handle it. Or let's send an immediate notification to the scooter company or the scooter provider so they can respond to that. We've been able to see real opportunities where organizations are able to detect and find missing violation fees upwards of $500,000 for some cities. Now, that's on annual. In some cases, it could be more. But we're also able to see cost savings when, just like you have a car and it gets towed and you have to pay a fee every time it gets towed, a really expensive fee. Scooter companies want to get notified so they don't get that fee for getting their scooters or bikes towed away, or what we call impounded. So we're seeing a lot of value in giving this immediate real-time notification of an issue as soon as it happens. More broadly, we're also seeing adoption of things like what Michael said, which was like the curb data specification, where we're seeing customers use our tool to basically use LiDAR, create a 3D rendering, and basically using a computer on the computer on your phone, the camera, basically using that eye to basically detect when scooters or bikes are in the proper place. We believe all of these things help improve user experiences, especially when it comes to managing and looking at multitudes of scooters or bikes in different areas. So we see a big future in the way we work as helping these organizations that drive their businesses with getting AI-ready data. And AI-ready data for us means being able to not just apply a standard, but use automation and use machine learning so they can help with reducing costs, saving time, as well as delivering on their core operations, which is best serving their customers. So I spoke a little bit about like what we're doing, but I wanted to also bring it back in to ask Tim and Emil some questions, because I know they see it. They're operating in an environment where the companies with hundreds of millions of dollars of backing are throwing out a ton of new technology. They're throwing out different things. And I just want to kind of get your stake on like, or thoughts or perspectives on how companies like yourself, how do you see yourselves or envision yourselves competing and winning more market with these huge companies? Because it's two sides to a coin, right? There's like, they've raised all this money, but now because they've raised all this money, they have to give a return. But companies like yours, you can raise $1 million and build a $10 million business, and it's profitable and everybody's happy. So I'm really curious of how you're looking at like growing and capturing market share, leveraging data as an asset and data as a strategy.
Yeah, so we realized that you know, the country is huge, and you know, we're just talking US, you know, we're not even talking overseas. So we realized that there's so many markets out there that's in need of, you know, reliable, safe, affordable transportation options that we can provide. And so that's pretty much our focus, you know, to go build that brand loyalty up and small to mid-sized markets that we can be profitable in. You know, where we can compete on the technology, we most definitely try our best, but using as many third-party providers that helps us, you know, fight the good fight is what we're focusing on.
Yeah, for us, it's also, I mean, again, working with you, it helps us to manage all the intake from the cities. If there's any updates via MDS, we can get those reports coming in. We don't need to worry about that. We can just check one system. We don't need to maintain that system. So for us, again, we can focus on what we do best, and that's basically, you know, providing the scooters to the right location. We use data to optimize our vehicle location, the peak times for rentals, the peak times for charging, for staffing, and so forth. So we're able to focus on our operations, while, you know, companies like yourself are able to work with companies like the Open Mobility Foundation to kind of come up with the open standard that makes us work better with the cities, so that the communication between us and the city are a lot more fluid.
Yeah, and just to tee off with the last question, so there's been some stories boiling up in the news, and it's about a micromobility company that shut down, and it's a company called Bolt. And how we know about them is because Bolt is based in Miami, received tons of funding. We know micromobility is a tough space. You guys can talk about all the stories, but you know, they were in a lot of cities. I think they were like in 30 plus cities. So, you know, one of the biggest critiques in that was, hey, cities are reaching out to these companies and they weren't hearing response. The customer service line was down. Now we have all these different bikes or scooters out on the road and we don't know what to do with it. At Boaz Bikes, do you see this as an opportunity? Because we work with you guys, so we know you guys are like, you know, we answer calls. We could definitely help. So how do you look at these opportunities when you see companies not taking the same path of being just profitable, strong, building from the ground up? Do you see this as an opportunity? Really curious about it.
Yeah, most definitely a huge opportunity, because you know, for whatever reason, you know, they went down. You know, more than likely it was because of horrible operations, but you know, where they messed up, you know, we've already proven that we can be successful at. So for us, it's saying, you know, they've already done the groundwork. You know, they've already introduced, you know, scooters to a market. And now it's just, you know, we scale when we're ready to scale, when we're able to scale and it makes sense to scale. But, you know, we're looking at all of the markets that our competitors have failed in and seeing how we can, you know, enter those same markets. Most definitely an opportunity for us to keep growing and yeah, keep building this thing up.
And again, it's also management of the resources. I mean, we make a concerted effort to, stretch every dollar we get. So again, working with third parties instead of building an in-house team we're more efficient with our resources to make sure that we're able to execute with what we have and execute it correctly. And again, it's all about the user experience. For us, we pay a lot of attention to customer feedback via our app and via the website and via social media. And we will focus that to make a better experience is what we're all about.
So there's going to be about 1,000+ people probably viewing this and looking at this. If you, Tim or Emil, if they wanted to be a part of Boaz Bikes, let's say they wanted to start a franchise or buy a bike or try it out, what would be the place to find you? Or the place?
Yeah, most definitely our website, boazbikes.com. They should see a waiting list for when we do open up this new round of funding. So that they can most definitely jump up there, be a part of it, and grow with us over the next couple of years.
Great. And then we have you guys plugged in here. Visit boazbikes.com. So Eileen, those are all my questions. Do you want to close out?
Yes, of course. What's funny is you asked the question that I was, most of you answered the questions I was going to ask, which was, how does Boaz Bikes consider its data strategy as it scales operations, right? Tim talked about how you use data to see what location to go next or where to put the scooters, right? So, and now Emil talked about we scale and we move and we open when we want to, when we know we're ready, right? So that answered the question, right? You use the data, and the data, we're working together to ensure that data is quality data, right? So that you guys can scale up faster and bigger. And I know that Boaz Bikes has a huge future, and I wanted to end with that question, right? So how do you see yourself in the next 5 years, both of you? Where do you see yourself? Boaz Bikes, obviously.
Yeah, hopefully, we're at, the global side at that point, in 100+ markets, and hopefully we are a public traded company at that point. But our goal is to offer safe and affordable rides for everyone. So 5 years we'll be very, very far, but we'll still have a big goal to chase after.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, just when people think for the short trip micromobility, they think Boaz. Let's Boaz it over. Let's go biking over. So
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great. And I want to thank you, Emil and Tim, for being on here. And like they said, visit boazbikes.com if you want to learn more. And also, if you want to learn about how DataGovs is also revolutionizing data governance, you can also visit datagovs.com. So thank you very much. And we'll keep talking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.